My name is Holly Crawford, and I'm 26 years old. It was 2 a.m. on a Thursday when the pain slammed into me like a freight train. I'd been feeling off all evening, a dull ache in my lower right side, but I kept brushing it off as gas or something I'd eaten. By 2 a.m., though, that dull ache had transformed into the sort of agony that drives you to crawl across the floor. I couldn't stand. I couldn't draw a proper breath. I was sweating through my shirt, trembling, gripping the edge of my bathroom sink, and staring at my own reflection like I was watching someone else shatter. I knew something was catastrophically wrong. I grabbed my phone and dialed my mom. No answer. I tried again. Nothing. I called my dad. Straight to voicemail. I alternated between them, my hands shaking so violently I could barely tap the screen. By the time I hit call number 17, I was sprawled on my kitchen floor, phone pressed to my ear, listening to that same voicemail greeting I'd heard my whole life. Asterisk, you've reached David Crawford. Leave a message. Asterisk, I left 3. Each one more frantic than the last. The final one. I was sobbing so hard, I'm not even sure the words came out right. I said, Dad, I think I'm dying. Please come. Nobody came. What happened next I only know because the paramedics filled me in later. My neighbor, Mrs. Patton, a retired woman in her 60s who barely knew my name, heard me through the thin apartment wall. She heard me collapse. She called 911. By the time the ambulance arrived, I was barely hanging on. The paramedics said my appendix had burst. They told me another 30 minutes on that kitchen floor, and the outcome would have been very different. They didn't say the word death directly, but I understood what they meant. I was rushed into emergency surgery. On the operating table, my heart stopped. I flatlined. The surgical team brought me back, but for a brief moment I was gone. I didn't see a white light or hear any voices. I just remember a deep, absolute silence, and then suddenly, noise again. Machines beeping, someone calling my name, and an unbearable pain in my chest from the compressions. When I finally woke up in the recovery room, groggy and disoriented, a nurse was sitting beside me. I asked if my parents had come. She looked at me with an expression I will never forget, not exactly pity, but close. She told me my emergency contacts had been called and that someone had indeed shown up at the hospital. But before she could finish, the surgeon walked in. Dr. Reeves, a calm man with tired eyes and a steady voice. He pulled a chair close to my bed and sat down, which immediately told me this wasn't going to be a routine post-surgery update. He said, Holly, you had a very serious night. We almost lost you. I nodded, I already knew that part. Then he said something I wasn't prepared for. A woman claiming to be your mother came to this hospital tonight. She tried to have you discharged early. I stared at him, sure I'd misheard. Discharged early? I just flatlined on a table. He held my gaze and continued. She was told that wasn't possible given your condition. She became argumentative with the staff. I felt the room tilt. He paused, glanced toward the door, and said, But the man who paid your bill said, and before he could finish, the door opened. Standing in the doorway was a man I'd never seen before. Mid-50s, broad-shouldered, in a simple gray jacket and dark trousers. He had kind eyes, the sort that carry weight without being heavy, if that makes sense. He wasn't flashy. He didn't look rich or important at first glance. He looked like somebody's quiet, dependable father. He stepped inside slowly, almost hesitantly, as if he wasn't sure he had the right to be there. Dr. Reeves stood, nodded at him respectfully, and excused himself, leaving us alone. I pulled my hospital blanket up slightly, more instinct than anything, and asked who he was. He sat down in the chair Dr. Reeves had just left and folded his hands. He said his name was Gerald Mays. He told me he'd been at the hospital that night visiting his own brother on another floor when he overheard the commotion at the front desk. A woman, my mother, had been loudly demanding the staff release me because, and I'm quoting him directly, her other daughter's baby shower was in the morning and the whole family needed to be home. Gerald said the nurses refused, explained I was in critical post-operative care, and that discharging me could cost me my life. He said my mother's response was to ask if there was paperwork she could sign to override the medical decision. He watched the whole thing from 20 feet away, a complete stranger, and he said something shifted in him that he couldn't explain. He quietly asked the nurse what was happening with the patient in question. The nurse couldn't share details, but Gerald saw enough. He saw no family member go to sit with me. He saw my mother leave the building. He walked to the billing desk and asked about my situation. When he learned I had no one present and that my insurance had a gap that would create an immediate financial hold on my continued care, he paid it.
Just like that.
A stranger paid my hospital bill, so the staff could keep treating me without administrative interruption. I didn't know what to say to him. I genuinely had no words. I'd just been told my mother tried to pull me out of a hospital bed the night I flatlined so she could make it to a baby shower. And now a man whose last name I hadn't known 5 minutes ago was sitting beside me, telling me he'd quietly made sure I stayed alive. I started crying. Not softly, but the ugly, broken kind that comes from somewhere deep you normally keep locked. Gerald didn't try to stop me or say everything was fine. He just sat there, which was exactly the right thing to do. Later that day, my parents arrived. My mom walked in first, and her opening words were that she hadn't heard her phone because it was on silent. 17 calls. She said she hadn't heard them. She then looked around the room and asked why there was a flower arrangement on the windowsill. Gerald had left it before he went back upstairs to his brother. I told her a stranger had bought it. She said, "That's odd." She never asked why a stranger was involved at all. My father stood near the door the entire visit, arms crossed, nodding at things my mother said, never once sitting beside me. They stayed 40 minutes and left because, as my mom put it, there was still cleanup to do from the baby shower. She said my sister had a beautiful morning and that I would have loved it. I lay in that hospital bed after they left and made a decision, so quietly and so clearly that it almost surprised me. I decided I was done rearranging my worth to fit inside spaces that were never built for me. Gerald visited me 2 more times before I was discharged. On the last visit, he brought his wife, Patricia, a warm woman who held my hand and said, "You have people, sweetheart. You just haven't met all of them yet." I think about that sentence every single day. I found out later through the nurses that Gerald had also formally reported my mother's discharge attempt to the hospital's patient advocacy office. He didn't tell me himself. He wasn't the kind of man who needed credit for doing the right thing. The hospital documented it. It meant that if anything had gone wrong that night due to outside interference, there was a record. I am fully recovered now. My relationship with my parents is something I'm still navigating, but the fog has lifted on who they have always been versus who I needed them to be. Those are 2 very different things, and for a long time I confused them. Gerald and Patricia have become people I genuinely consider family, real family, the kind defined by action and presence, not by blood and obligation. If this story reached you today, I want you to know something. The people who show up for you in your darkest moments, even strangers, even quietly, even without being asked, those are the people who show you what love is actually supposed to look like. And sometimes nearly losing your life is the thing that finally shows you whose hands were never really holding you to begin with. If this story moved you, if it made you feel something real, please subscribe to this channel. Every week we bring you true stories of survival, betrayal, unexpected kindness, and the kind of human strength that doesn't make headlines, but absolutely should. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and become part of a community that believes real stories deserve to be heard. You being here matters, and so does every single story we tell. This story is dedicated to every person who has ever called for help and heard silence. You're not forgotten.